Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Grow Yourself, where we at least try to dive deep into conversations and stories and inspiration to help you learn, grow, and change professionally, personally, and beyond. Okay, folks, I'm not going to lie to you. My guest today is someone I have been following for years, and I consider her at the list of amazing people.
Oh,
But
thank you.
but let me let me set this up. In my world of coaching, consulting, and speaking, I run into people all the time who claim to let's just say have answers, to our personal, professional, organizational problems until they don't. And they may be well-meaning, but nonetheless, my guest, she's the real deal. I say earnestly that she is that one person, personally, professionally, as an expert, of course, along with thousands of others that I actually pay attention to, I listen to. She is in a word, truly a thought leader, and I'm very excited about this. So, who is this person, you might ask? By the way, she has a very cool name, Tamsen Webster. She's a master of message design, a true expert in turning big ideas into lasting change. And with over 2 decades of experience, Tamsen has helped leaders and organizations, and by the way, innovators design and craft compelling messages that not only resonate, but drive real action. She's a sought after keynote speaker and the author of 2 transformative books, Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Ideas Irresistible. And now her newest release is Say What They Can't Unhear, the 9 Principles of Lasting Change. Tamsen has served as the ideas strategist for TEDx Cambridge for more than a decade and is a trusted mentor for entrepreneurs at MIT and Harvard, to name a few, with degrees in marketing, American studies, arts administration, and management communications. She brings an unmatched depth, and I say that sincerely, an unmatched depth to the knowledge, to the art of storytelling and persuasion. And she's just known for her abilities, to help her audiences and really, you know, align their ideas, I guess you could say, with their existing beliefs to create meaningful and lasting impact. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Tamsen Webster. Tamsen, thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted, Kevin, and I feel no pressure at all now to live
Of
up
course,
to that. But
well,
but thank you for such a kind introduction. That's
but
very kind of you.
of course, it's truly a pleasure to have you here. First of all, Tamsen, I just want my audience to know you just a little bit better.
Sure.
Who is Tamsen Webster?
I am a Greyhound mom. No, which is true. It's yeah, I love crossword puzzles. I'm allergic to the sun. No,
Are you
so
really?
all of I am actually, and
Oh,
also to sunblock, so it's fun.
oh my.
Yeah, great. I'm a vampire, in other words. It's
Okay.
very exciting. I
I was
still have a
gonna.
baby tooth in my head, which is just still like clinging to my youth. But what to the topic at hand, um, I really feel that in certain ways, though I had no idea at the time, that I have been focused on this idea of what it takes to create transformational change pretty much since I was a teenager.
Hmm.
And that the first real desire for that kind of transformational change came when I had my first panic attack at the age of 17. And I, not wanting to have them anymore, spent quite a long time and the next 17 years trying to figure out how to get past that. But it set a pattern of really just being super fascinated in what makes people believe enough in something to act on it and keep acting. And it for whatever reasons, I developed over the years a special concentration, I guess, in communication. I've always been very fascinated by words and ideas. And I realized that whether we're talking to ourselves or we're talking to a market or we're talking to the folks on our team in an organization, any change really is captured first and foremost in the words that we use to talk about it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so, yeah, and so this real focus on, I would say, change communications, whether that's been in marketing or branding or, the early days of social or sales messaging, or even actually change management communications, because that's what I did first coming out of grad school, has been just a deep interest of mine for forever. And just I'm just endlessly curious about it,
Mm.
endlessly fascinated by it, endlessly compelled to share what I've learned with other people, because I don't know anybody who doesn't have either a change they want to make or a change they want to help other people make, or has a big idea that they feel can change everything for at least someone. And I feel like if I've learned something about helping to get those ideas out there or those changes made, gosh, we need those changes in the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, and the words to capture them, that's an addressable problem, right? Like that's a solvable thing. And I just really don't want to leave this earth thinking that someone didn't get an idea out there simply because of words that and a skill that is fairly easy to learn.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll tell you, one of the distinguishable factors that I found in you as a professional is that you do go beyond just sort of the, here's what it is. I mean, I often hear you, even in some of your short clips, you get into the action that needs to be taken. So it's beautiful to understand change and all those sorts of things. But, but one, how to take action, but two, I think as you often speak about, sustainable action, something that's actually
Yes.
going to stick around for a while.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this real quick though. So as a professional, explain to my audience what you do.
So I describe myself officially as a persuasive message designer. So I typically work with leaders, thought and otherwise, to help build buy-in for change. So I'm
Mm,
specifically helping to build the words and help figure out how are we framing that message to maximize that buy-in from the beginning. But unofficially, but still accurately, I say that I'm an English to English translator.
I love that.
um,
I read that
because
somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, I think just so often, whether it's expert language to everyday language, whether it's kind of whatever, however we're thinking about something to communicate it so that somebody else understands it, that's really, I think, the core of what I'm doing is working with folks to understand the real meaning behind whatever it is that they're trying to get across, and finding ways to communicate that meaning with minimal loss, minimal loss of information, minimal loss of potential, minimal friction with the other person or the people that you're talking to. So yeah, I mean, I spend my days really working with folks to help understand their ideas or clarify them, and then find the words that allow them to communicate about them as powerfully as possible in as little time as possible, because I don't know anybody who ever feels like they have enough time,
Yeah.
particularly to make change happen.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. I'll tell you the other thing that I believe that you do very, very well. And I listened to your TEDx, I think it was Wilmington, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
Wilmington women. Yeah.
I discovered that in that 12-minute, it was about a 12-minute talk, as I
Mm.
recall, there you asked no less than 20 questions in 20
Oh, did I?
minutes, in 12 minutes.
Never
Yeah.
even thought about that. Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah.
but I think this is part of your work, isn't it? To
Yeah.
just to ask questions, and I want to I have a list of them here, but in that talk, and
Mm,
I'm probably getting ahead of myself here a little bit. Three of the final questions that you asked, frankly, blew my mind, and you were talking
mm,
about. So here are the questions. I'm just going to let them lie for a second.
sure.
The first question is, "What's your monster?" I
Mm,
mean, okay, it comes together as a listening as the list as listeners are listening to this, it'll start to make sense. So question one is, what's your monster? Question number two is, what's your I love this. What's your amazing idea that makes it possible for you to let that monster makes it impossible for you to let that monster survive. I
Mm.
mean, you can really get your mind around that idea. And then finally, the last one, to my point that I talked about earlier, what swords do you need to bring to the fight?
Mm.
Those are, I mean, those three questions by itself. What's your monster?
Mm.
What is your monster? What is that great idea that you have that it's so great that you've got to slay those monsters to get
Mm.
to it. And then what swords do you need to bring to the fight?
Yeah.
Let me just ask you about question asking. I'm putting words in your mouth, but you appear to be an excellent question asker. And where does that fall into your work?
Yeah. Like many things, it was what I discovered on my own is just a natural way to get new information into my head. Um, I'm discovering as I get older that I believe I have at least some level of neurodivergence, and so I think it's consistent with that as well.
Mm.
But when things don't make sense to me, I want to know why, and so I never really grew out of that kind of obnoxious toddler of like, well, why? Well,
Why?
why? Why? Why? Well, why? Well, what is that? Why?
Love it.
Because I mean, I literally am just like naturally fascinated by other people. I'm fascinated by how things work, why they work that way, when things don't work, why does that happen? And so, but as I've gotten older, I've discovered that, as I've tried to help other people do what I do. So, I like to say now that I help other people make transformational change. That I tried to figure out, why did question asking work so well? And there's a
Mm.
couple reasons that are now research and evidence backed, not my research, but other folks' research that show that. And one is that a question immediately creates a curiosity gap, meaning it creates a gap between what somebody knows and what they want to know. So, I mean, when I ask questions, I am asking them because there's a gap between what I think I know and what somebody else has said, which seems to suggest a gap in my knowledge. And so I'll ask questions. But it is an incredibly useful thing as well for engaging people into a discussion, whether it's about change or not. But particularly when it's about change, by framing a potential outcome in the form of a question. How can we make this particular change happen? What's a better way to do X, Y, or Z? It puts you and the other person into a joint discovery mode,
Love it.
right? And it keeps anybody from being too mentor-y. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that, you know, it's well established. I can't find any specific source, but that all persuasion is self-persuasion, right? And there's also good research that shows that the more that you push someone in the direction of a change, the more that they will dig in and fight you, even if it's a change they wanted to make.
Mm.
So just simply by asking a question, and particularly if you're trying to get attention, let's say for your idea or your change, if it's a question the people that you want to reach are already asking, it means that they're already invested in hearing any
Interesting.
potential answer. So it saves a lot of effort. The other thing, which is much more recent about the benefit of asking questions, is that particularly when you're trying to, there's a lot of information out there and advice out there about anchoring change
Mm.
messages or just any messages in a problem. How do we fix this problem? You've got this problem. How do you fix the problem? And while that sounds like a question, it's
Mm.
actually focuses all the attention on fixed, not fixed. The
Mm.
research shows that it actually puts people in a quite binary mode of just like,
I
this will
see.
fix it, this will not fix it, rather than saying, what is the step beyond okay, well, why is that thing a problem? Why do we have to get past this so that we can get to this other thing? And so if we can anchor a message actually on that question first, how can I get the level of mental energy that I want? Not how can I solve the problem of being tired all the time? What's so fascinating about this research is that what it shows is just very much from a kind of like where linguistics meets neuroscience. It actually opens everybody up to considering many, many, many more possible solutions than just how do I not be tired, right?
Wow.
And so by looking at like how do I get the level of mental energy I want, so that I don't have to be tired, so that I can be my best self, so that I can perform well. Other things that we may see as problems in the way of that, it really just starts people in a much more forward moving path, which again, if we're thinking about change as momentum, if we can actually either capture them in the flow of a forward movement that they're already in anyway,
Mm.
or right, just start with just how we frame something instead of just saying we're going to stop once we solve it, but actually, hey, let's move towards the answer to a question. We've actually very subtly started that movement for them, but not in a way that's pushed them. We've just created that gap that then their brain wants to follow. So just ends up being much more, I mean, as you probably figured out, I'm a big fan of working with how our brains work and not against it.
Interesting.
And questions are just foundationally part of what we do as humans, is try to figure stuff out. And so that's a good place to start.
Well, I love it. You said that so well. The thing that I see that's a challenge for many, goes for me and probably just about anybody else, is that be it from a personal or professional standpoint, the older we get or the more senior we get in an organization, the more time spent, I think there seems to be less of an inclination to ask questions. Why? Because we
Mm,
work out of our bias. I mean, we just kind of
yeah.
assume that we know it. And I'm always cautioning leaders to sit down to the big, the big table with all of their VPs and whatever, and start barking out orders, or as you said, set things up in a binary way, rather than saying, we got this situation, Tamsen, what do you think we ought to do?
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
or what do you think?
Yeah. You're just period. Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yeah. I mean, yes,
That's a
absolutely.
different
I mean,
approach,
yeah,
right?
it is a different approach, but even in those moments where a leader, for purposes of speed or direction or mandate from a board or something like that,
Mm,
even has to present and
yeah,
say, okay, we have to make a change. And at least right now, here's why I think this particular change is the right one. I think there is a way, well, I know there is a way to frame that in a way that still invites that kind of engagement and buy-in and discussion that I find, and what I've seen, it just ends up being fundamentally more productive. Because sometimes we don't have time to just say, well, what does everyone think? And
fair enough.
also, we don't want to do that if we can't actually take into account what they're saying,
Well,
right?
that's a good
That's
point.
right, right. And so, but when you have the time, absolutely do it. It absolutely is I completely agree that it's the way to learn. And I don't think that anybody really at the heart of it feels like they've got nothing else to learn, right? Because if nothing else, I think a leader never wants to look like they don't know what they're doing.
Fair
and
enough.
so usually kind of framing anything from the perspective of this is going to make you like even more authoritative, this is going to make you like even more trustworthy, even more, it's that's what's so counterintuitive about offering up your perspective for debate, is that it actually is the act of a very confident person.
I love it.
And so, you know, and what I mean by opening it up for debate, though, is framing that change first from a question, saying, "Well, we all want to know how we can do X, right? So we're trying to achieve this. How can we keep pace with the competition, or how can we unseat the dominant brand in the market, or how can we effectively enter this new vertical? I don't know. Depends on what the organization is. We need to start this new, we want to add this business model into our compensation policy. I don't know, whatever it is, so that we can stay competitive, reach more people, whatever it might be. And then what I have found and seen to be true, and then again, increasingly research is backing this up, is that if instead of going, here's why I believe this, and answering that question with a whole bunch of data, but to instead answer it in the terms of, and you mentioned it in the intro, in terms of beliefs that are shared with the folks that you're talking to. Because I
Yeah.
believe, right, that the, good sales, the, techniques behind good sales are applicable no matter where they happen. And I also believe that the more people we can connect with, the more opportunities we have to sell. And so that's why I want to start this new program, right, which will allow us to reach people and sell to people in online spaces that we haven't been able to reach in other ways.
Wow.
What do you think? Right.
Love it.
And what
That's the
that
Simon
allows,
Sinek question, right? Why and then what?
yeah, I mean, I think so. Yes, I'm very much aligned with Simon Sinek, and what I see, what I do is complementary, because there's that really important, like, why are we doing what we're doing, which is the kind of Simon Sinek why.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing this because it will do that, right? Or we're doing this. I mean, he references it in his TED talk is like, we're doing this so that we can be innovative, right? But
Mm.
what I am really arguing for, and what, gosh, for all sorts of good reasons, I could talk about this for hours, truly. We skip over the why behind the how. Why do we believe we're in doing it this way?
Oh
Right?
my.
So let's go back to this example of this leader who is wanting to introduce, let's say, a social selling model or something like that to a traditional field team of sales reps, right? They're used to going out and meeting with people one-on-one to do this kind of social selling. That means I have to, like, get involved on social media. Ugh, that's not how it works. It's not good. But if we say, hey, we're all trying to make money faster, right? More money faster. That's right. I want to, I want to make this change because, not it's going to do that, or research says, or whatever. Again, going back to the why behind the how, because great sales aren't location dependent, right? And two, the more people we can reach, the more people we have to sell to. Right.
Mm.
And you could back that up with additional saying, and obviously right now, like, there's a whole group of people that we're not reaching because we're physically limited in how many people we can go to. So that's why I want to explore this option of going for that. And yeah, then after you do that, say, and research shows that this would probably work. Here's what the plans would be. Here's what the implementation would be. But I think we skip over, whether we're talking to ourselves, a loved one, or our teams, we skip over that step of securing agreement in principle, securing agreement on that this makes intuitive sense about why this would work. And we skip right over to what the
Ah,
evidence and the data says about why it should. And
yeah.
that's different, right? Because just getting all, persuasive, Aristotelian on you. I mean, by starting with these broad beliefs that you share, right? Great sales are not location dependent. Um, if you're fairly confident that most of your people believe that, and that you're also fairly confident that most people would agree that you're talking to, that the more people you have to, you connect with, the more
Sure.
people you can sell to, well, then what you're doing is you're taking two things that people agree are true, and then you're putting them together to say why this particular specific instance would work because it's based on things that are already true. Versus when we present let's say, the same policy, but just say our competitors are doing X, or like the research says Y. We're saying that based on that information, this might be true here. And I know that's
Mm.
very subtle,
No, no, I'm
but we're
fair.
asking
I'm
people
yeah.
to take very specific information that
Hmm.
happened elsewhere, or from other studies, and say, yeah, okay, we think that this other data applies here. It might be true. And if this is true, then this will work. Rather than, I agree these principles are true, so now I see why it would work.
I love that.
Or if we're talking to, if we're talking about, from a leadership standpoint, if someone goes, well, yeah, I'm not sure about that here. Well, again, now we're starting to talk about these things in principle before we've invested the time, the money, the effort, the consultative fees, the, implementation, et cetera, way back at the beginning, when fundamentally that would have been the, after we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, the same problem would have existed, right? It is, to me, at heart, it's the same issue when we say that we hire for skill and we fire for personality, right? That what usually that means is there's something fundamentally misaligned about how somebody on our team fits with the
Yeah,
culture of the organization or something about that, which means, again, because humans operate on an internal logic, there is something foundational from a principle standpoint, from a value standpoint, from a belief standpoint that doesn't align. And so my whole philosophy on this is like, let's get that philosophy on the table. Let's
that's
get those beliefs
fascinating.
on the table first so that we save everybody a lot of time. And when there is friction or gaps, we can address it right there before going down a path to discover, months from now and dollars from now, that there was actually a really basic conversation we needed to have right at the beginning.
I love that. I mean, because you know, in part, you're well. Let me say this to that point. What I have found is that when when you just fundamentally ask a leader, or let's say, a leader within an organization, tell me about your culture. I mean, so many of them just go, oh, if they
Yeah.
don't ask what do you mean by culture, they go, and then they start really just kind of pulling things out. And so when you're trying to, even on the ground level, invite people in to come be a part of your organization, the best that they can do is judge whether they like them, not whether they actually fit into the culture, because they
That's
can't
right.
really articulate the culture,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right, right. Yes. I mean, and when people do, so, I spent, the first 2/3 of my career in branding and marketing, kind of organization out, like really focused on that. And there was something that always bothered me about branding and about personal branding and all of that, is it's so much of it.
Yeah.
Oh, and I will loop into this. I also worked for 15 years in nonprofits. So vision statements, mission statements, so much
Mm-hmm.
of all of that
Mm-hmm.
is, for good reason, aspirational. It isn't what you are, it's what you
Mm-hmm.
want to be. But that gap between what researchers call like our values in use versus our espoused values, meaning what do we say our values are versus if we actually look at what our organizational behaviors are, or even as a leader, what do you
Mm-hmm.
say your values are versus what do you actually do? It's that gap that does all the damage. It's the
Mm-hmm.
gap between those two that does everything. So, I
Yeah.
like, somebody who says, well, I believe in work-life balance, says the leader, and yet they're sending emails at 7:30 on a Friday night.
I
Well,
love it.
no, you don't. Like,
Yeah.
no, you don't. Like, I know
Yeah.
you wish you did.
Yeah.
But your actions actually say that
Yeah.
there are things more important to you than that. So,
Yeah.
my my approach when I'm working with companies and leaders on this is that we're actually operating in reverse from the actions. And so, and a change is a great example of that. So, why do you believe? And again, it's not, you can't give me some other version of another benefit of what it achieves. That's just another version of that question that it answers, right? So, okay, it'll make you more competitive. Okay, it'll make you more innovative. That's still kind of an outcome. That's still one of those higher
Mm-hmm.
level whys.
Yeah.
Why this change? Why this change in this way?
Mm.
And that's where we start to get to, oh, okay, that's actually why we're doing it. And and a lot of times when I'm working with clients, they're like, why is this so hard? And the reason why it's hard is not because they don't know, it's because they know too well. And what I mean by that is, it's something you mentioned earlier, Kevin, where we can get to a point where we stop asking questions because we
Mm-hmm.
just assume, like, the more you've been in business, the more you're like, your brain just goes, I've seen this before, and you just run that script, right?
That's right.
Like, this is what that means. And that is based on one of these principles that's truly foundational to my work. It's a principle I talked about in both of my books, that every decision has a story. Meaning every decision that we make has a story behind it. And what's difficult about that is that it isn't this like origin story of like once upon a time. It's the story that's happening unconsciously in the deepest, oldest, fastest, most intuitive, instinctive, belief based, assumption based part of your brain, right? So whether you think of that as system one thinking or fast thinking or lizard brain or monkey brain or alligator brain, I've heard lots of different names for it. It's all the same thing.
All the same thing.
That brain is constantly setting up causal relationships, right? It's always constantly saying, if I do this, or noting them, if I do this, this happens. And it starts to establish beliefs about why those things happen when this happens, right? So you start to say, well, that person behaves this way because they are this, right? Because they're just a jerk or whatever. And, or when people do this, my experience is that it's because, that this is like, they're self-serving or whatever. I don't know. I don't believe that, but we start to create those stories. And what happens is we, unless they're brought out for us to look at, we don't question them once they've been established. So this whole every decision has a story applies to literally everything that we do. And so if you're trying to communicate,
Completely 100% agree with you on this, by
yeah,
the way. I mean,
yeah. I mean, we know it intuitively because we can go back and you're
mhm,
like, yep, that's what I
mhm,
do. And you can look at other people and you're like, that's clearly what they do. And then I'm happy to tell you that
mhm.
lots of research in lots of different areas also says this. Understanding that can really unlock a huge amount about yourself, about other people, about your team, about your organization, about why messaging goes wrong, about why it goes right. Because the reason why it's so foundational to my work is to say this story is going to happen anyway. And those stories, that cause and effect, and the thing that links them is your brain will create those things unless you supply them. Like, or the person you're talking to will fill it in unless you supply a new arrangement of those things. And this isn't about changing people's beliefs. It's about kind of rearranging the assumptions and the beliefs that they've already got, right? So that's why, going back to the example of great sales aren't location dependent, now, they may not have been thinking about that in context of some kind of new, scary to them social selling model. But if that's a deeper, stronger belief, right? Well, I'm a great salesperson. And yeah, I can sell anything to anyone at anywhere, anytime.
Mhm.
And now you say, but not on social. And it's like, oh, right. And so all of a sudden you're just rearranging that. But this is why it's so important and why I
Right.
get so fired up about it.
There's a
Yeah, go ahead.
story behind that, but not on social. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? That
Yeah, well, what
the
happens
fact
is
that they
so
think that they can't do it is there's a story behind that.
there's a story behind it because, again, the thing is saying if I do, like, maybe the deeper story that they wouldn't be saying out loud is if I do this on social, I'm going to fail, right?
Okay.
Why? Because I don't know it and I'm good
Mhm.
with, and and that deeper story is I'm really good at the things I know, right? Which is a very common belief, by the way.
I can
Right.
believe it.
And so what we're doing is instead of saying, like, so what you can see there is that, they don't know social. We're not going to change their belief about that quickly. Right. The only thing that's going to happen that's going to make them less afraid of that is actually interacting with it. But just telling somebody not to be afraid, just like when I was still had my panic disorder, just telling me not to panic, not very effective. So you can't just say, like, don't be afraid of social. I mean, they are, right? They may not put it in that language, but they
Mhm.
are.
That
So
is the story.
that is the story. And so by supplying a different story, one that arguably is stronger than the one that they're telling themselves, then we can kind of displace that original story with something else. And it being stronger is really important because in order for it to be stronger for them, it has to be based on ideas that and beliefs that are already in them. So that's why I'm suggesting that when you say to someone, "Hey, great sales aren't location dependent," that all of a sudden, because it includes as a broad concept anywhere, online, offline, whatever. And if we're, again, connected in with what does this somebody know, right? They're good at what they know. That's the deep, deep,
I
deep
love
belief.
that. Yeah.
And so if you can position as saying, well, great sales are not location dependent. Great sales can happen anywhere. Then that person goes, that's right. And now all of a sudden you've anchored the social as just being something that's a subset of something that they actually feel good about. I know how to sell. I can figure this out, right? Like this is, I just need to figure out how to do what I do in this new environment rather than I need to learn social. And this process of learning social might mean that I fail at this other thing that I know. So this is why understanding that every decision has a story is so important. Now, can we dig deep into everybody's like personal psyche and figure out like what the story is that's holding them back? No, nobody's got time for that. But you can actually make the argument for the change, right? And if you make a
Right.
really strong argument for the change using beliefs that you're pretty sure that person would
Yeah.
agree with, then what you do again, you're just kind of writing over that story because their brain is looking for that information anyway. So by giving them an outcome, hey, you're going to make more money faster. By telling them what to do to get there, all right, we're going to start to explore with doing this, in social settings. And you've given them not one but two reasons why they could do that successfully. Again, not data, belief. Great sales happen anywhere. The more people that you can connect with, the more people you can sell to. So therefore, right, since we're not reaching the online people now, we're going to start doing this
Yeah.
thing. Their brains are looking for that information, and by supplying it, it doesn't allow them to create, like it doesn't mean it won't happen. But now anything that they have been previously telling themselves now has a very explicit battle to fight, right? It
Wow.
is basically saying, well, now it's not social, not social. It's okay. Well, where is actually the conflict? Because if you don't believe that great sales can happen anywhere, and if you don't agree that this will get us in front of more people, well, now we understand where we need to shore up like some of those things with other beliefs. But what I have seen over and over and over and over again, Kevin, is that you can make this belief-based argument, and it really is an argument. It's a case. Not argue like I'm right. It's a case. You're presenting your theory, your philosophy, your case for this change using elements that your audience intuitively agrees with. By doing that, right, you kind of start the process. You're actually presenting a case to the part of the brain that is what makes the initial decision anyway, and which by and large, we never speak to.
Are you
Occasionally we
talking
do,
about
but
the emotional, the right side of the brain?
well, it's kind of the backside of the brain. So there is like left and right, but I work more in the philosophy of kind of slow brain, fast brain, right? Like
Gotcha.
fast brain's in the back. That's the kind of oldest part. That's the part we share with the animals. And then the slow brain, which is that rational, able to really consider,
Yeah.
that's the one, our prefrontal cortex. That's what we've developed as
Yeah.
humans
Yeah.
to really do this. That's where we check those assumptions, right? But
Yes.
what we think we're dealing with as rational thought is actually a conclusion that's been delivered to us from that animal brain, that fast brain.
Hmm.
And most of the time we don't check that conclusion. And
Got it.
this is why we skip this step of making this kind of belief-based argument when we're talking to other people about a change we want them to make, because for us, for reasons we've never had to consciously think about, of course this decision makes sense. And so what
Yes.
happens is, because now it's in our rational brain and it makes sense to us, right? Now when someone says, well, why does it make sense? We stay in that rational piece and we try to give as much data and evidence as we can. But the decision was actually made deeper. And that's what I try to work with my clients to do, is to say, listen, that data and evidence is still important, but
Yeah.
it's going to work so much better if we actually speak first to that part of the brain that is going to do the intuitive check on anything else you say.
This is fascinating. I love what you're saying. And I don't recall exactly the scenario you described, but you said earlier talking about, I think, a leader who suggested this might be, um, and the if I'm understanding you correctly, the inner, injecting just that word might, or those words might be, opens up that discussion. Is that not what you were saying? And it's
Oh,
tied to what you're
absolutely.
just talking about now.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to, without at the risk of like boring your listeners terribly. I mean, it goes to kind of classic
So this is my
argumentation.
belief, but
Yeah, exactly. And so what that does is basically says, this is my belief. It owns it as what it actually is,
yeah.
which is in fact a belief, right? But by owning it as a belief, lots of good things happen for you as a
Mm.
leader. Number one, it feels vulnerable because you're saying I believe this, or like I know this to my core. Like that's like
Ooh.
you can know something, but when you say it's like
Mhm.
I know this, like it's not a
Yeah.
rational no, it is a like a deep whole body. I understand, I know this, I believe this. You are first and foremost really what looks to be quite vulnerable to your audience because you are saying I believe this to be true. These are the principles that are guiding me here. Right. And by doing that, what you're doing, and this, again, happy to jump on a soapbox about this, what it subtly does is it moves the risk of the change to, in my opinion, to where it belongs, the person asking for it. See, what we do a lot of times when we're trying to ask people to change or inspire other people to change, like, again, we're already convinced it's a good idea. So we've got nothing in the game, right? There's
Mm.
nothing. Yeah, okay, you've got money if you're an organizational thing or whatever. But really, you really don't have any of your own personal stake in this. Like when you're asking somebody else, because you're like, I know this is a good thing.
Got it.
They don't know that. And so you are asking from a point of like deep confidence that this is a great thing, but they don't have that same deep confidence. And the
Oh,
information you're giving them is just like basically, trust me, this is going to be good for you. And if their history with you or history with changes like that is not trustworthy, they're not going to leap with
I
you.
love it.
So to me, by saying I believe this is, that with this change makes sense. Here's why I believe it makes sense, because A, it helps us answer this question. It helps us achieve this thing that I believe we all want. Second, because of these principles that I believe we all share. And this change is the combination of those principles, like those principles combining to serve that outcome that we want. That's why I believe. And yeah, you're taking the risk because it's someone might say,
That's
I don't
bullshit.
agree.
That's right.
Right, exactly. Or yeah, but okay, maybe I agree with you, but now show us
Yeah.
how that works.
Yeah.
But the last thing that I think that also does is that it builds in back to classic argumentation. I won't spend a huge amount of time here. It builds in what is recognized by the person who built the kind of modern model on Aristotle. So a guy named Toolman, um, is that he talks about how including what he refers to as qualifiers in your argument can help strengthen it. Now, I know that is super counterintuitive, and it's super counterintuitive to all the alpha, like hustle, like never, and I trust me as a female communicator, people, and particularly women, disagree with me on this all the time. They're like, don't apologize. And I'm like, dude, if we don't accurately qualify and say, like, this may not be true, right? Help me understand, like, then you've created an opening for
Yes.
yourself. Like, but by saying I believe this and I legitimately want to have a conversation about, like, where we're going, and now because this is, I believe this is true, what does that mean from here? It 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 allows people to go, oh, well, this isn't a done deal, which means necessarily it could be, but it means that without, when you put a qualifier in like that, it's known as to again get technical on you, it's known as a inoculator to persuade. Like it's known as, it's like an inoculation. Basically, you are giving people, because what's happening is you are restoring agency to the other person. You're
Yes.
basically saying, I am not taking away your control over whether or not you agree. I'm actually
Yeah.
giving it to you because I'm stating it as a belief. So I just, again, for so many reasons, whether it's just naturally feels more comfortable to you, or you're looking at it from an ethical standpoint, or you're looking at it from an efficiency standpoint, because it's way quicker, by the way. Or you're looking at from an economic standpoint, right? Because it's going to save you a lot of money, right? If you know where the no's are and if you know where the yeses are, and you can get to both of them more quickly. Like I don't really care what your motivation is. Every motivation that I have seen in leaders that they're looking for is satisfied by speaking to the principles of a decision first.
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised here, but you're absolutely blowing my mind. I mean, there's so much there for people to take away from this. As you were talking about all that, I spent 20 years in the Air Force,
Mm,
and a fair amount of my work was in human relations education and yada yada, and basically helped commanders deal with people problems. We'll put it that way.
yep.
And as you're talking through this idea, I was thinking about the leaders that I have locked into my head that I would approach about maybe a serious people problem. It
Mm,
it could be it could be anything from leadership to to a discrimination issue or sexual
mm,
harassment issue. And the leaders, hands down, the best ones were always the one that when I went into their office and let's say if they were already aware of the problem and why I am there, they would they might explain in now in your terms, they might give their belief on the situation and maybe even what's behind it. And then the best leaders would always say, but Kevin, you know, um, I can't say that I'm 100%. I want to hear from you. What do you think?
mm.
And ensues, and part of what I think you are talking about, this, as my good friend John Bentley says, opens up discovery and dialogue.
Yep.
That we can now, assume we're all trying to, I guess I could throw this in there, trying to achieve the same result,
Mm,
solve the problem, whatever it is. Now you have, you know, and by the way, the commanders, when I'd go into their office and they rolled their eyes and didn't want to hear it, and they just thought, oh, that person was just complaining, yada, yada, yada. I can tell you about them. I'm sitting there going, they pretty much have their mind made up. They're not
mm.
really interested in what I've got to say here. And it's obviously a much more difficult conversation, man. This
Yep.
is powerful what you're saying. So let me just, if I may, move on to your books. I'd like to ask you a little bit about your first book first because it's
Sure.
fascinating, and I do believe those questions that I mentioned really have to do with the find your red thread.
They do.
uh
Yep.
what's your monster? I love these questions. I'm going to forever keep them in front of me. What's your amazing idea that makes it impossible for you to let that monster survive? And then what swords do you need to bring to the fight? So you can go in any direction that you want, but I'm just
Yep.
interested, tell folks what the uh the red thread is.
Sure. So it's many things, which is not probably ideal. But the way that I found to be most useful to it is, since we were telling about stories, is that to me the red thread is as a handy way to refer to that story that you tell yourself about why something makes sense.
Mm,
um and it applies to when you are, put a red thread in content or in conversations you're putting out there to other people, because again, they need to see a story they can tell themselves to make it make sense.
mm,
And by articulating yours, a lot of time that allows them to follow more easily. And the process for figuring that out is about going back and discovering for yourself, how did you build that story in your head piece by piece? Like, what were you
interesting.
trying to get? What did you discover to actually be the problem that you had to solve first? Why was it such a problem? What was the thing that helped you realize that there was another option out there? Where did that, like, how did those combine into a change in thinking or behavior? Okay, then what did you do, or what are the next steps from here? And so all of that was actually, when I first started my business and went out on my own about 8.5 years ago, I had that process, but I didn't have the name. And then I had a client who was my second client in several years from Sweden, of all places. And
Ooh.
in referencing some work we were doing together, which was about kind of presenting information to an audience, both of them separately, two different companies, two different situations, both from Sweden, said, "But what's the red thread?" And I was like,
Oh.
by the time the second person said it, I was like, okay, so that wasn't just that person or that company. I was like, now the one thing you two have in common is Sweden. So I was like, so is that a phrase in Swedish? Like, what does that mean to you all? And she's like, oh yeah, it's the logical progression of ideas. It's the thing that makes things make sense. It's the through line of something. And I'm
Got
like,
it.
that's the name of the thing that I'm trying to figure out. So then I had asked her if she knew where it came from. She didn't. So I decided to research. I asked a question. And the first fascinating thing that you'll discover if you start to research red threads is that there is a red thread in just about every philosophy, religion, culture,
Mm,
etc. There is
mm,
just something about a red thread. That said, the red thread that most like the origin story that most closely aligns with this idea of a logical progression of ideas, the thing that ties everything together, is believed to come from the myth, the legend of Theseus, the
mm.
Minotaur, and the labyrinth at Crete. And so, for those not familiar, Theseus was the son of the king of Athens. Athens was under the kind of was under the thumb of the king of Crete. The king of Crete had a monster that lived in a maze, the labyrinth, and the Athens had to send its best and brightest, depending on which version of the legend every year, every 7 years, to basically as tribute, Hunger Games style, to be like sent
Interesting.
into this maze and try to survive the Minotaur, which of course nobody ever did. And then one year, Theseus either elected to go or elected not to be excused from going. And he decided he was going to end this once and for all. After
Interesting.
all, he was the son of King of Athens. He's like, it's time for Athens to take ourselves back. And so he goes and he meets a woman named Ariadne, and there's a whole thing. He does not do well by Ariadne. I need to make that very clear. She helps him immeasurably. So she gives him a sword so he can kill the Minotaur. But the other thing that she gives him, because she knows very well, she's the daughter of the tyrant, is just she gives him a skein of red thread. She gives him a ball of red thread. And he's like, what the heck is this for? And she's like, it's for the maze, you dodo, right? Like, in other words, like she was
Interesting.
like, unwrap the thread as you go through the maze. So after you defeat the Minotaur, you can find your way back out again, because that was like the hidden problem of the maze. Was everyone always was focused on the Minotaur, but the thing was that the labyrinth was so dark, so complicated, so whatever it was, that, and in some versions the entrance moves and things like that, that the Minotaur itself couldn't escape. So even if he did survive killing the
You
Minotaur,
die of
it was very
starvation,
possible
right?
he'd die in there, and then Athens is still left without its future ruler. So anyway, I mean, so he follows the red thread. He kills, stabby stabby on the Minotaur. He follows the red thread back out. Everybody's happy. He basically does Ariadne dirty. He forgets to change some sails, and his father dies of grief, and all these other things. So Theseus is problematic, to say the least. But the red thread, Ariadne's red thread in particular, when I heard that story, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the process. Like, we're tracing the path that we followed to like slay this problem, and master a problem we didn't know about, right? And we're tracing it in such a way that we can retrace it later, either for somebody else or for
Wow.
ourselves or something like that. And so that's how those two things came combined, and then I
Wow.
applied them to my process, since the
By the way,
process
no, that's fantastic.
produces a red thread and follows the red thread process. All things are red thread.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. I mean, if one application, I guess, or maybe that's not the right way to say it, but is that you know, the person goes in, slays
Mm.
the dragon, slays the
Yep.
beast, the monster,
Yep.
knows their way back and can say, okay, the path is clear. Let's move now. You see, I mean,
Yeah.
so it's this idea of really understanding the path there and the path back.
That's right.
You
So
know.
that if you are, let's say that monster is a change, right?
Mm,
I mean, the reason why I love this metaphor, this analogy so much is because there's the known problem, which is the Minotaur, but the
mhm.
maze is just as important, right? Because if people
Right.
don't master the maze, we've got that. And so, and I think a lot of times people are like, well, it's just the way that you get to the monster. I'm like, and like, if you don't get there, you don't kill him. And if you don't get back out,
Yeah.
nobody knows, right? Nobody's will have known you were successful. It gets stuck. And so for me, like that speaks to this kind of hidden part of the story that's always there. And so, when we're talking about like tracing this red thread, articulating the turns, which is really what we're doing on our way to a change, we're basically at its very simplest, we're saying, listen, there's a reason why we are taking these turns. I mean, thesis would be like, because that's the one that actually works, right? That's the one that got me in, so that's the one that's going to, it's where the thread is. But we're still doing the same thing when we're articulating this underlying case, this underlying story behind a change or an idea, is that we are doing what we're saying earlier. We're explaining the why behind the how. We're not just telling them go left, go right, go left, go right. We're saying go left because right is going to lead you into a dead end. Go right because this, because of this. And I know because I've already figured this out and we've seen that. And you don't want to go a place that isn't going to take you
Wow.
to where you're going, right? So therefore,
Wow.
so again, it was very serendipitous in
Yeah.
its way that and it took me about 6 months before I ever these two things together. But once I did, I was like, yeah, this is the right thing because it
Yeah.
describes both the process and the output, and it turns out to be quite memorable for people. So it has
Absolutely
worked
brilliant.
well.
No, that's so brilliant. And I'll tell you that another thought popped into my head, not completely related to what the ideas that you just put forward, but I was also thinking about mentors that
Mm.
who, when I encourage folks to go find a good mentor, I'm going to start using this idea that you're talking about here because there are many great successful people who cannot tell you what their red thread is.
Oh yeah.
You come to them for advice and how did you get there? I mean, the best that they might be able to do is talk about some big mile markers or make the rest up, but they're not the right person to mentor you because they can't tell you, they can't articulate why I turned left here as opposed
Yes.
to right here because right seemed like a more direct thing. Yes, but left had a wider lane for you to work in. I mean, and so again, I think if I'm using this correctly, it's
Yeah.
this idea that
100%.
people should remember when the red thread when they're thinking about a mentor that has made the journey has
Yeah.
let's say they've come back, but they go, yeah, we slayed the dragon, but I can't remember how I got there.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where this, while this doesn't apply to everything, right? I would say that for many of the more for many things in our life, right? There are things that we could not have learned how to use them
Mm,
unless we actually use them, right?
mm,
You can't learn to ride a bike from a book. You can't gain
mm.
muscles by like reading about weightlifting. Like there are certain things, there's certain things you just have to do,
Yeah.
right? And the thing is that while we may not realize that we learned lessons that way, right? Like
Mhm.
what really the cause, the kind of the underlying my underlying mission vision with whatever with the red thread is to say that there really is there's a lesson under every turn, right? There's a reason why you went that way, right? And it wasn't just sometimes the thing is it's going to feel like inspiration, divine or
Mhm.
otherwise, because it's what popped into your head
Mhm.
from the other brain that you have, right?
Mhm.
And so, and the thing is like, but that's a good thing because then you can use this
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah.
developed, like really to kind of start to go,
Yeah.
well, why did that make sense? Or
Yeah.
when it comes to mentoring, okay, this was my own experience,
Mhm.
but is the lesson to really just do exactly these same things?
Mm.
Or is there an idea here, a lesson here that's bigger than the specific context that created it? because that, when you mentioned earlier that I work with a lot of TEDx speakers, and that's one of the things that we say all the time is that a good story alone is not enough. We have to figure out what is that bigger idea,
I
that
love it.
lesson that's bigger than the context that created it. And what we're saying is, the way to think about it, again, this is all stuff that we know actually from childhood, right? Think about Aesop's fables.
Mm,
Like back in that time, like it's Aesop like made the lesson of the story clear. Like, here's this story, and here is the point I want you to draw from it.
mm,
And the thing is that all stories teach a lesson, whether it's implicit or explicit, like it
hmm.
is with the fable, of
I
the
agree.
of the moral of the story for Aesop. And in fact, there's this long standing maxim about storytelling that every story is an argument. It's an argument for doing something a certain way. And so with my new, part of what was driving some of the thinking in the new book was I started to go down that hole, that rabbit hole of saying, what if it's literally an argument? And that's how I started to study like argumentation and like, well, what's the minimum viable argument that we can make? And I don't think it's an accident that Aristotle gives us both the three act structure for storytelling and what are known as syllogisms, which are the simplest form of argument that exists, which it's premise, premise, conclusion, or principle, principle, conclusion. And I started to realize that in fact that's true, that every story that tracks with a three act structure at the between the first and the second act, it introduces explicitly or implicitly some fundamental principle or assumption that disrupts everything that's happened previously. And then every story of change, of transformation, has a moment that Aristotle called the anagnorisis, also, which translates to recognition, discovery. It's, I call it the moment of truth. That's why
Yes.
it called that in the red thread. And that introduces the other principle for the argument and basically says, if this person wants this thing, and this, because this principle and this principle both exist in the world, right? And when that person makes a positive change and gets the thing that they want, it's because they took both of those lessons and put them together. And this is the thing, is that no idea comes into our head without that structure being in place. I mean, it just
Interesting.
doesn't.
Yeah.
And so by understanding that, it allows you to, whether, I mean, I'm a huge fan of puzzles. I said that at the beginning jokingly. I was like, oh, crossword puzzle. But I mean, crossword puzzles are fun because they are what's known as lateral thinking. You have to kind of
Mhm.
like take a clue and say, well, what's the universe of things that could fit into that
Mhm.
meaning of the clue, and the universe of things that the clue could mean, plus has certain letters and certain orders and
Mm.
whatever. But you can use, if you love that, and even if you don't, like, you can just kind of use that natural curiosity to say, well, why did I think that was a good idea? Because it wasn't the data,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah.
data you used to, there was simply because it fit in with something that you already
Yeah.
believe. So, that's a big point in my second book
Wow.
as well, is that these arguments that we use to justify our decisions preconsciously, they're based on beliefs we already have. And so if you're trying to get someone to do something different, they're still only going to agree with an argument that's based on beliefs they already have. So it's about
Mm.
creating, using beliefs they already have, a new argument for a different decision using very old beliefs and very old desires,
Whew,
and
that's yeah,
putting
that's a
those
head
together
twister
in
right
that
there.
new way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a head twister. So, speaking of your second book, no,
Yeah.
it's fascinating though. Say what you can't unhear. So I'm going to ask a different question first, and then I
Yeah.
want to understand the title, though, really where the title came from, because it
Sure.
is. I do remember when you first started speaking about it on LinkedIn. I was like, oh man, that's cool right there. So
Thank
so
you.
here's the question for you though.
Yeah.
Who 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 needs to read this book? Who
Oh,
should read this book?
so I would say that I mean, the people I wrote this book for were leaders,
Okay.
thought or otherwise, of transformative changes. Again, scale of the transformations up to you. Who really already understood that they need buy-in for a change, but either struggle with the current advice out there on how to get it, or just don't even, or for whatever reason, because it's not working, it doesn't feel right to them, it feels manipulative, it feels coercive, or they just don't even know what to do. But they understand already that if I want this change to happen, it has to start from within that other person. So how do I make that happen?
Wow.
Like that's the book.
Yeah.
That's what who the book is really for. So I wrote it specifically for folks in an organizational context, but as I talk about in the introduction, all of these lessons have been tested and tried and forged out of both personal and professional contexts. And so it does apply,
Yeah.
but nominally it's it's for leaders and
Sure.
organizations.
But if
Yeah,
but if you're reading a book like this, I
yeah,
believe, the principles are the same. I mean,
they are.
principles for
Yeah,
personal change and organizational change. I mean, obviously there's some contextual differences, but the principles are the same.
yeah,
Know where you're going, how you're going to, I mean, whatever it is. So,
that's right.
but so let me just present this to you very quickly. So let's say there's an organization, they suffered from really bad leadership, let's say in the last few years,
Hmm.
created a really terrible environment where nobody wanted to be there and nobody wanted to come there. Let's just say it's a
Yeah,
department or something.
yeah,
Um, and so they get rid of a few leaders. So they get rid of, I'll use this term, toxicity,
hmm,
and now install different leaders. Um, what is that? What is that piece there about saying what they can't unhear? How does that move into it, or to the degree of
yeah.
what you just said?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me back up a little bit and define what I mean by something. Well, like, what is something that
Please.
someone can't unhear? And then I'll move forward into that particular situation. So, in my experience, something that someone can't unhear is, and this next part is the most important part. It's a recognizable truth, meaning the person you're talking to, without convincing, without evidence, without data, only based on their own experience or intuition, recognizes this statement, concept, idea, whatever, as a truth. But they really can't unhear it if it creates, crystallizes, or cracks open how they see the world right now. Something about that. And so, what I mean by that is sometimes you hear something and you recognize it to be true, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this opens up a whole new world. Like I would say, something I said earlier, when by saying, great sales aren't location dependent, right? Like that should, in the context of making more money faster and not currently reaching all possible people, it should create a new way of seeing the world, of seeing, like saying, oh, well, if I can free up my awesome locations, my sales skills from being from specific locations or modes of selling,
Mhm.
then oh my gosh, like that's going to
Yeah.
create a whole new way all on its own because it's a recognizable truth.
Hmm.
I didn't have to convince you. Your brain's going to do it on its own. It's going to
Hmm.
make those cause and effect links on its own. So
Or but let me
crystal,
just ask,
yeah, go ahead.
so in that scenario though, it could at the very least be, maybe it's not solid in their head that that's a recognizable truth, but they've got a hunch that they might go, that's a good point, right? Is
Yeah,
that
I
the
mean,
same
so it's
thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think they could, I mean, because there are those gradations of acceptance,
Yeah.
right? And particularly in
There you go.
the situation you talked about, there is gonna, when people are dealing with like past wounds, and I don't mean to be too squishy about that,
No,
but
be squishy.
like they're bringing their history to this. Like, my context for a lot of my current research is adult learning. In other words, how do adults with experience adopt new ideas, right? Which is learning. But that has a lot of baggage for people. But it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, if we're just talking about how people with experience bring their experience to bear when they're learning new things, right? If they've got a bad experience in a situation with a kind of thing with a person, then that's going to get in the way. So yeah, somebody may say, yeah, that's been true for me so far. Let's see if it's true here too. Right? Like some people are going to be like, I agree in principle, but really I'm going to have to experience it for myself before I'm going to truly agree with this. Or I'm going to have to see more about how you're going to do this to see if this makes sense to me. So sometimes something that
Mm,
we say crystallizes something again, where you say, well, may not have had that belief kicking around in my head kind of in those words, but when somebody says it that way, you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what is happening here.
that's exactly right.
Um, or that's a beautiful way that now, kind of in
Hmm.
this beautiful, kind of proverby, portable way, I can just say to
Mm.
myself as a mantra or a reminder or whatever. One of my favorites I heard very, very early in my life was that a life lived in fear is a life half lived.
Beautiful.
And again, that didn't create a new perspective, but it crystallized how to talk about
Hmm.
something that was a deep seated belief of mine anyway. So then
Mm.
it became a thing I could repeat um, to myself or to others. And then the last one is this kind of like cracks open, right? And what I mean by cracks open, sometimes it's not a specific, one line phrase, but it is that whole argument taken together can suddenly go, oh my gosh, like that I cannot see this whole situation in the same way again, because either a specific thing or this combination of things
Oh, wow.
means I there's just no way I can go back to thinking about this the way that I did
Mm.
before.
Yeah.
And
I can't
so
unhear that.
I can't unhear that, right? And it's just like,
Wow.
and this is a thing I saw over and over again with, one of my favorite examples actually came. So I spent 13 years moonlighting as a Weight Watchers leader, in addition to my full time work in branding and messaging, which is where I was looking at change communications from a personal standpoint.
Sure.
Um, and one of my favorite examples of this, of kind of just crack open how people see the world, had to do with what people who considered themselves to be night eaters. Now that's a belief. There's no official diagnosis of night eating. It's just people consider themselves as night eaters if they do very well with keeping themselves on track for health goals throughout the day, and then something just they go off the rails at night. Like dinner just starts this downward trend, and then they feel like they can't be successful with their health goals because they it all goes to pot, right? Like after after a certain time. And that was like that was made worse by part of how the Weight Watchers program was set up then was that it's set up very much like a budget, like as a food budget. Like food has points, you have a certain number of points, and the general idea was if you stay within your budget, you'll reach your health goals, whatever that is. But what would happen with these night eaters is they'd be great, except by the time they got to dinner, right? Like now they're dealing with the last few points that are left. And,
Got it.
then their habit, their self-identity as night eaters starts to go against, I don't have any points left. That adds stress so that they start to compensate it. And it just, it
Yeah.
all goes to heck.
Yeah. And they say,
So
screw it. Yeah.
and then they say screw it, but it's not that they don't want to get to their
Right.
health goals. They do. It's just
Right.
suddenly we've got kind of again a
Right.
deep-seated story. I'm a night eater, and this is
Right.
the way the program works. These two things don't work together. It's hopeless.
Wow.
And so what I said, what that to me is always a challenge. I'm like, no, we can figure this out. And again, this didn't work 100% of the time, but it helped enough that it made a difference. And so what I said to those people was, and what I realized was like, there's nowhere, anywhere in any of the literature, any of the instructions for Weight Watchers, like where it says that your day of points has to start in the morning. But a day is 24 hours, right? So as long as it's 24 hours, like a day is a day is a day, but nothing says when that day, when your points day starts, you get to decide that. And for a lot of people, that really cracked it all open because that meant they could start their points day at the point where they needed them the most. And it better aligned their points with what their energy, their stress level, and their kind of self-management levels were. And for a lot of people that made a huge difference. But again, it was at the point where they had to trust me that it didn't say anywhere that it couldn't start. But again, it made sense as long
Yeah.
as it's X number of points in a 24-hour
Yes.
period. That could help. And now they could start to see of like, oh my gosh, this totally cracks open the way I was thinking about this program, myself, the way that my hopes for being able to achieve it. And that really comes into play. Okay. Now with all of that in
But let me real
perspective. Yeah.
quick,
Okay.
real quick,
Yeah.
if I may just,
Of
but
course.
what you just said was in, I mean, you just proved your idea about this concept of putting forth a recognizable truth. As soon as you said that, I mean, it like there was
Boom.
fireworks going off in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do want to make one thing really, really crystal clear that you're not saying that Captain Crunch and a good movie at night is wrong. Now, you're not saying that, correct?
No,
Okay.
not
All
at
right.
all. I
Just
mean,
want.
that was another thing. I mean, so the thing is, like, what I made a little tiny, it was almost in its way a kind of a precursor to my latest book. But when I was a leader, I put together this little tiny book and I called it the Pocket Tamsin. And it was like the size of a business card. And I put in it like the things that I said to my leaders, to my members all the time, just as little reminders. And I would give them that book I think when they reached their goal weight, I think is when we did it, or when they reached lifetime, which is meant that they reached their goal weight, they maintained it for, forget it, forget it now. It's been a
Okay.
while, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, doesn't matter. But one of the things that I would say in it to that point is that weight is not a moral issue. There is nothing anywhere that is so, like, that says that, like, you are a good person or a bad person based on the food that you eat, and food is
Fair
not
enough.
inherently good or bad, so
That's right.
therefore, like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
again, but this is where making sure that we're anchoring, like, so it's, an argument without an anchor is not as
Mm,
effective as one with one. And what I mean is, like, I can make that argument, but it has to be anchored to achieving your health goals, right? So that in the
right.
moment they can't just go, yeah, but I don't care. Like, no, no, no,
Oh,
if you want this, then
yeah.
this is the way to get there.
Yeah.
Because by making sure that it's, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
kind of anchoring a message, anchoring a change in something somebody already wants, say, in a question they're already asking, is saves a lot of time and effort. But it also is that last check on somebody trying to talk themselves out of something, right? Because part of the work I do when I'm working with clients is we're trying to make sure that question, whatever it is, and I say this in the book, I say it needs to be impossible to unwandt, right? It needs to be
Mm.
a question about which, like, a question they cannot be neutral about. Like, they cannot be neutral about it. And because if they're neutral about it, then it doesn't really matter. But if it's
No.
something like that they want, that it's important to them, that they've got stakes that are attached to it, that are really kind of really important to them, again, to their core, then that helps to avoid a change getting lost in what I like to call the rationalization trap, where, again, because we are, it's kind of like if you do the same workout the same way in the same order, your body gets really, really used to it. And even if you just flip around that same thing, but you just do it in reverse order, your body's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
The thing is, the same thing happens every day. And so when people say, like, people resist change, I'm like, actually, we deal with change all the time. It's what we, when any kind of change is asking us to move out of that kind of efficient state, right? Because there is that effort, which I talk about in the book, about trying to minimize that for people as much as possible. Um, when we're trying to get people to kind of minimize that effort, I totally lost my train of thought. Where did I go? I was talking about saying what they can't hear. We were talking about minimizing effort. We were talking about, whew, I don't remember what I was saying.
I don't want to send you down the wrong rabbit hole, but
Yeah, it's
yeah.
a yeah. I'm sure it'll come back to me. But even if it doesn't, like, the point of kind of anchoring, oh, right, the rationalization trap. Because we get very used to doing the things that we're doing and we don't think about them because our brain, like, kind of, again, our, as long as everything's working, our little fast animal brain is just like, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. But that's where something that somebody can't unhear serves as this kind of like perma check on that. Because if somebody hears that thing, and sometimes it's the
Yeah.
phrase, oh, day is just 24 hours, or I want to achieve my health. How am I going to achieve my health goals? Right. It's the thing that they want. That serves as that check with the next time, right? They're like fast one, like animal brain goes, have the chips, have the chips, have the chips. And again, sometimes it's fine. Like, again, do I have the points? Like, am I, do I understand? Like, fine, totally fine. But that's where it can really come into play. So, does that,
Wow.
hopefully
Yes.
that
No, that's
answers that question.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And now for the organization, though,
Yes.
that
Yes.
so let's just say then the new leadership is stuck with the old culture,
Yes, yes.
right? And so
So,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, and that's actually a kind of leader that I also wrote this book for. Um Particularly the first chapter. Because what is 100% not going to work is I know better than you. When I'm as a new leader, I know how to fix this. Because these poor people, I mean, they have been incredibly loyal for whatever reason, whether that's for the loyal to themselves or loyal to the organization or whatever. They have stuck it out despite like the torture that clearly they have been put through by these people that you've been talking about before.
Right.
So this is one of those situations where the principle that leads off the book that I think speaks to this most directly is that change isn't just an action, it's a reaction.
Reaction.
And a reaction in two different like senses of the word, meaning I make a very clear distinction between getting someone to act, which is usually, it can be internally motivated, but typically in a leadership situations, it's externally motivated by, a hope for reward or a possible risk or punishment or a consequence that's negative. But if you really want change to happen, like the action has to sustain, right? They have to be able to do that action over and over and over again. So that's what I mean, like at
Right.
one level about change being a reaction. You are reacting over and over and over again. And that only happens internally.
Oh, wow. Well
Right.
stated. Beautiful. Yes.
And the thing is that when you are trying to create the conditions for that to happen, if you're trying to use your communications or design communications or design a scenario where you're trying to inspire that internally motivated change, the reaction is also a reaction to you, right? Because that, like, and what you're saying and how you're saying it and all of that. So in this specific situation, so I can land the plane here, this is not necessarily a place where I would come in as a new leader or recommend a new leader come in and say, this is the way it's going to be. This is a place where I would use this same kind of structure to actually help build the new changes together with the organization, with this team. Because the first place I would start is, what is the question that we are here to answer for the organization? Or what is the question we're here to answer for the company, the market, et cetera? Like, what are we doing? Like, what is the thing that we're here for? Like, that's the classic Simon
Wow.
Sinekian why. Like, what is the question that we are answering for whoever our primary stakeholders are? Let's decide that together, right? Now, okay, what do we believe as a group is necessary, right, in our approach? And we're only going to pick two things, right? So this doesn't go on forever because we're building our really simple minimum viable case here.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
We're just picking two things, like one, like, and I don't mean table stakes, like it has to work or it has to be cost efficient. No, 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 no. I mean, what do we believe is the way to get something to work? What do we believe is the best path to cost efficiency? Um, so, for instance, I was working with clients yesterday and they were like, it needs to be innovative. And I'm like, everyone's going to say it's innovative. You have to show how it's going to be
Mhm.
innovative. And so where we
Yeah.
ended up saying is like, well, we're actually going to focus, the thing that's innovative about their approach, right, is, and they're talking about how they model, they're modeling outcomes, right, to make better decisions. The thing that is specific about their approach is that they're really paying only attention to the levers of change, meaning what are the things that change, what changes them, and whatever, because the things that are not changing aren't actually the things that are going to have the impact, right? So by saying we believe a better way to make these decisions is to understand what's changing, if that's not what everybody else is doing, then by definition it's innovative. So again, like, work with the
Fair
team to
enough.
say, what are those things that are, like, that we believe as a group, that we can agree on as a group, are at the core of how we believe, not the tactics, but the foundational elements, these components that are necessary to do this. And then critically, why? Why do we believe those things? Because that's how you get those fundamentals, right? So that you can say, well, why are we changing? Why are we focused on what's changing? Well, because you don't, you kind of spit it out even when you're talking about things. And I already did, is because it's what changes. It's what changes in the system that's going to have a change on the impact, right? Like
Mm,
not the things that are staying still, it's the things that are changing that are going to change the impact. So that's why we're going to focus on what's changing. Okay, is that everything? No, because if we only look at one dimension of what's changing, there's going to be a lot of other things. So the other thing we're going to take into account that's going to be core to our approach is, let's call it, multiple perspectives, right? Because the more perspectives we can take, the clearer picture we will have. So then you say, okay, so as a group, like what our approach that we're going to embody, and you hear this is not a positioning statement, it's not a brand statement, it's not a mission statement, it's not a vision statement, it is an articulation of the existing philosophy of the case for why they do what they're doing, is saying, well, to make these better decisions, to truly understand these impacts over time, we are going to pay attention to multi-perspective changes, or changes from
I
multiple
see.
perspectives. That's what we're doing. And so that leader then has an opportunity, like they've built buy-in to not just what they're doing and why they're doing it. They've bought buy-in from the beginning for how they're going to do it
I
and
love
why
that.
they're going to do it that way. And it ends up being a touchstone that can keep coming back to, so that it's not about like this program, that program, because then everything can be kind of checked against those philosophies, right? It's like, well, does it do this? No. Okay. Well, what would? Right. And then so now you get a chance to go, okay, well, how can we bring what we're doing more in line with this? And it kind of does an end run against that lip service values, lip
Hmm.
service beliefs. It
I
basically
love that.
says, what are we trying to do? What do we believe is necessary for doing that? We're going to limit ourselves to two load bearing components, and we're going to articulate in kind of inarguable ideas why we believe those components are necessary for that answer, and that's what we're going to say.
Yeah, this is definitely a different look at, if you want to call it change management. I mean, it's brilliant. You're taking it deeper, I think, than the average soul out there. And I've read a lot of good books on change. So let me just I've taken up so much of your time already, and I appreciate it. About your book. So first of all, let me just ask. So it's say what they can't unhear,
Yeah.
and then the second half is 9 principles of lasting change.
Mhm.
Tie those two things together.
Yes. So, I mean, it's implied. So, if I were to go back, I would say, yeah, I think well, it's implied
No,
that
it's
it's
good. Yeah,
communication.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so say what they can't unhear is kind of both the device by which you create lasting change if you're in a position, of articulating it. Um, but it's also kind of what you have to understand in order to create something that
I
somebody can't
see.
unhear. So, to me, those two things work together in that way, which was say what they can't unhear, because kind of by definition, if you've said something that somebody can't unhear, or if you've heard something you can't unhear, you are changed. Like it may not
Correct.
be a fully transformational change, but you can't unhear it, you can't unlearn it, you can't unring a bell, which is why there's a bell on the
Hmm.
cover, and why I use this kind of like ding motif all the way throughout. But that's the idea. It's like you've already changed them in a little tiny way, right? Like how then do you use that, like, and we've all had that experience, right? We've heard something we can't unhear. We've seen something we can't unsee. We've read something we can't unread. And it did start a process for change for us. So again, I'm trying to like model, even from the title of the book, the whole approach that I'm talking about is just like this intuitive, like, yeah, absolutely. If I can say something that someone cannot hear, I can just intuitively start to see how
Yes.
that could lead to change. And then by saying, okay, the 9 principles of lasting change, I'm saying,
Yes.
okay, this isn't just a, unhear kind
Hmm.
of speaks to
Right.
that, but it's
Yeah.
also saying, here are the things you need to know. if this is the thing that you want, right? This is what you need to know about people. This is what you need to know about change. This is what you need to know in order to say something that someone can't unhear. But that was really what I was trying to do. And
Oh
my
man.
approach was, again, to live this philosophy of just
Mhm.
saying, you know what, if you put the principles out front, then people are either going to agree with them or not. And yeah, I
Yeah.
back them up with stories and examples and data and research and all of that. But fundamentally, when you said like, who's the book for? Um, I can go back to that question. The book is for people who are trying to build buy-in for transformational change. Like they're asking the question, how do I build buy-in? How
Yeah.
do I build lasting buy-in for large scale change? Or just how do I build lasting buy-in for change? Well, however it is, that's the question. If somebody doesn't have the
Yeah.
question, this is
Oh,
not the book
I
for them.
love that, because and by the way, that getting that buy-in could be for yourself. You
Absolutely.
don't have strong
Yeah,
enough buy-in to make the change, but certainly, anybody in this arena understands that one of the biggest challenges with change is in, let's say, organizational change is getting the folks to buy in, because their first reaction, I mean, to your point about a new leader that comes in and just says, okay, we're going to do this, you can be rest assured there's no buy-in, because their first thought is, okay, you've been here 3 days and you already
what do
know
you
what we
know?
need to do. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
exactly right.
So
That's
I'm out, bought out.
right.
Okay, so real
What
quick
out?
on the principles, and you did speak very eloquently already on many of them. One, change isn't just an action, it's a reaction. Two, every decision has a story. You mentioned that. Number three is principles set patterns. I think we're good there.
Yeah, we spoke around that one. Yep.
Yes, identity is the greatest influencer. I really, if just sitting looking at it, I'm like, okay, what does that mean?
Okay. So, meaning how we see ourselves or how we want to be seen
Mm,
is the most reliable motivator of action, period. And so,
very interesting.
and what I'm specifically speaking there is because, I mean, that's true no matter what. However you want to be perceived, however you want to think of yourself, or you want other people to see you, that's going to drive what you do. And that's going to drive organizational decisions as well. How do we want to be seen in the marketplace? That's going to drive those decisions. It's not always correct, right? But that is what's driving it. But since I spoke to before to saying we can't understand everybody's individual motivations and
That's
everyone's
right.
individual identity. And so this particular principle speaks to the fact that there is one aspect of identity that is very reliable. And that is that everybody and this is one of those rare things that actually also applies to sociopaths, wants to be seen as smart, capable, and
Oh,
good
interesting.
by their own, at least by their own in group, right?
Mm,
And so that identity is the greatest influencer is really speaking not only to that broad concept of someone's going to like, if you can't understand what somebody is doing, it's because you don't understand what it is how they are trying to be perceived either by themselves or other people,
wow.
period. And so, but if you can just put on the exercise of, well, they're operating from an internal logic, which is where principle set patterns and every decision has a story goes together, um
Mm.
and they want to be seen as smart, capable, and good. You can actually use that as an exercise to say, well, why would that make sense to them? Why would a smart, capable, and good person do that thing, vote for that person, resist this change? Right? Because if you can start to look at it from that perspective of why would a smart, capable, good person, and
No,
this
I
can be
love
sometimes
that.
a mind-bending exercise of saying, well, I'm a smart, and you could also turn it on yourself. I'm a smart, capable, good person. Why would I react this
Yeah.
way?
Listen, so I remember hearing this lecture by a guy who used to be a member of the KKK, and he
Mm,
was deeply involved for many years. And he had, he got to a point where he denounced it and really went on this apology tour, literally an apology tour, where he went
mm,
around and apologized to everybody for what he thought, what he believed, and what he said. But here's the thing that blew my mind that goes with what you're saying. Um, he kind of brought up this idea of being smart and capable and good and all those other sorts of things. And of course, the us sitting in the audience were going, then why in the world would you join a hate group? And believe it or not, his answer was to be loved.
Yeah,
Is that crazy? That he wanted people, he wanted to be, you just listen to his background. He grew up, he was quirky. People just, bullied him, didn't like him, all sorts of things happened that led him to
that's
this
right.
point. And this group, be it intentionally or unintentionally, saw that this person was an outcast and therefore invited him in and loved him
Yeah.
despite their, radical, crazy mission, whatever the case might be. That's a fascinating look. So let me keep going here. So, Dennis, okay, the deepest beliefs are the hardest to shift. Couldn't agree with that more. I mean, I think, I'm a Christian. I promise you, there is not a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, anybody out there that could ever change my mind. I mean,
And that's fair.
I'm just
Yeah.
trying to say
And
that these are deeply,
what
yeah,
I'll say to that is like a lot of times so the whole point of that chapter is that we usually look at that as a barrier. And to
oh,
me, it's an
interesting.
opportunity
Okay, fair enough.
because because there are those deep-seated beliefs
Yes,
that are unshakable,
that's right.
truly unshakable. And so if we can create our case for change using those unshakable beliefs,
Hmm.
then we've got it. So just as an
Love it.
example, so every major religion and philosophy, Muslim, Christian, Jew, like
Hmm.
everything,
Hmm.
Eastern religions, has some version of the golden rule.
Agree.
Do unto others as you have them do unto you.
Mm.
So it is possible, I'm not saying it's always going to happen, that you could find a path to agreement on principles that are not, this is a Muslim principle, or this is a principle of Islam, this is a principle of
Mm.
Buddhism, this is a principle of Christianity, this is a principle of evangelical Christianity, like,
Mm.
or this is a principle of Judaism, and go to, do we believe that there is, for whatever reason, no matter who said it, no matter why they said it, no matter whatever's coming, no matter what's going to happen as a result, that there are some things that we all agree about how people treat each other.
Wow.
Can we start there?
Love it.
Just that, like, so that you actually go, in my mind, I keep going like, there, it's deeper than the label we put on it, is that,
Right.
from, and it goes back to, again, however you believe we got to where we are today, but it goes back to how our brains developed, right? So that, it really is this kind of deep, whatever you may believe is driving that operating system, that inner force that does speak to you without
Wow.
your being relation, whatever, however,
No, it's
I
beautiful.
really don't care where you think it comes from.
Hmm.
I mean, I respect where you think it comes
Yeah.
from, but the reality and the experience of it is still the same, which
Yes.
is, there are some things that we have figured out as people, as
Yes.
humans sharing this earth, that things generally go better when we people, like, for all of us
Yes.
individually and together, if we treat people this way versus
Yes.
when we don't. And you're right that once we start getting into the in groups out groups, that starts to fracture.
100%.
But this is what so much of this book and so much of what I just, hope that I'm creating a little light in the world around, is like, there are, in those moments where you think that this polarization and these divisions are not resolvable, I keep looking to these things where I'm like, yeah, but there's so much we actually agree on.
Yeah.
So can we start there? Can we speak to those deep beliefs that are hard to shift? And in fact, they're so hard to shift, they give us the best foundation for doing things differently.
I love that, and it goes back to what you said earlier about you're not really trying to change beliefs, if you will. So you
Mm,
have the Jew, the Muslim, the Christian, the Buddhist, the, Hindu, whatever, and you're having a conversation about let's all just get along. And they're like, well, but we're this, but we're that. And then you say, well, how about this statement right over here? Does
mm.
that resonate? Oh, yeah, that's actually part of, okay. That's something that they can't unhear in my way of thinking. Beautifully, so well said. Now, the other one that caught my attention was so numbers six, pain is the enemy of long-term change. Seven is when truths fight, only one wins. And number eight, though, let's see, is it number eight? You can't want
Yep.
it more than they do.
Yes.
That resonates with me as a coach. I coach
Yes. Yes.
people,
Yeah.
and I'm like, if I gotta, you know, If I got to force you to, I mean, if I'm doing most of the pushing or pulling here, something ain't working,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's right. So you can't want it more than they do, which gives you a couple, the two main options are find something that they actually do want, that this is attached to.
Mhm,
And if that
mhm.
doesn't exist, then there's a point at which sometimes you have to let that go.
Let it go.
Either you have to let go of the fact that you're actually going to get buy-in for it because you're not, and you're
Mhm.
as a leader are going to have to push something through that just isn't good for these people or they're just not going to like. And that's part of what you signed up for with being a leader. I still hope you're going to try to find a way to connect it to something that they actually want,
Right.
because by having a change with buy-in is better than not.
Mm.
But the other thing is that sometimes this is just not right. This, what you're offering really isn't the right thing.
Fair enough.
Your organization isn't for everybody. Your
Mhm.
approach isn't for everybody. This book isn't for everybody. If you don't, like I said, if you don't want to build buy-in, like this is not for you. And if you don't agree with these principles, this is not fine. Fine, but I believe these. I've got, I've tested them. Again, but I believe them. And I've run into enough other people that believe them for good reasons, both their experience, their intuition, and the evidence. That's where I come to. It's like the
Mm-mm.
most you can do is give somebody understanding, right? Like that.
Yeah.
And as soon as you know that they completely understand that you've been heard, right? That they understand what this is for.
Mhm.
They understand these principles. And if there's been friction and you've tried to explore other ways to get to it, again, fine. But if you've gotten to the point where you have, gotten them to understand and they still don't want it,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
then
100%.
release it.
Release it.
Like that's
Yes.
the point at where you have to just, and that
Yes.
can be hard when you're like,
Yes.
oh, but I
Yes.
want, and you're like, yeah, but
Yes. Yes. Yes.
until
Fellow
they
coaches.
do,
Yes.
it just might mean not right now, right?
Right.
Like that's
That's a
the
good
other
point.
thing.
Mhm.
And so that's part of and that's the thing that I learned as a Weight Watcher leader. Like sometimes, like that's still the value of trying to say something that someone can't unhear, because they just may like, it just may take a while for things to settle in and for them to test out other things or whatever. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, I just think that the best thing that you can do is to and I don't mean this in any kind of woo woo way, but I mean literally speak your truths. What is true for you? What is this thing? What is it based on? Why do you believe it? Why do you think it will accomplish this thing this way? And come to it from the things that you believe or that
Yes.
you know to your core are true.
Yeah.
Speak to those truths. And I think that that's the best that you can do.
And I think just from a general standpoint, I think generally, no matter what the topic is or the issue is, generally speaking, I found people to be okay. I mean, if this is your truth, okay, I can deal with that rather than to say that this is the truth. It's your truth, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's a different approach. And so then the last principle is there's no such thing as believer's remorse. I think I get that. Um, but please share just the thought about that.
So I think we've all had that experience where we've made a choice
Mm,
and maybe it didn't turn out the way we hoped, and
mm,
maybe it had consequences that we didn't anticipate and that we would undo if we could. But that even despite all that, even despite the fact that we can understand the pain that it caused ourselves, other people, whatever, we still believe the decision was the right one.
mm.
Right, like that it
Yes,
was
right.
still like that we still wouldn't undo it, even
Yes,
knowing everything we know right now, we still wouldn't undo that decision.
yes,
That's what I mean.
yes. Oh, I love
there's
that. It
there's
makes
That's what
complete
I mean.
sense. Yes,
And
complete sense.
so and that happens when you can stand 100% behind
Hmm.
why you made the decision that way at that time.
Hmm.
And you can only be sure that you'll be able to do that if you figured out that for yourself.
I'm thinking about this. It may not be a direct connection to what you're saying, but I coach a middle school tennis team, and there's such a great privilege of being around middle schoolers in a competition, and they're getting crushed, and you get to talk to them between, games, and they sit down and their tears are flowing from their eyes because they're getting crushed. And
Yeah.
I think that's where I go with them, Tams, is I'm like, okay, listen, you're down 7-0. It only goes to 8. You know, what are we going to do here? And and a short conversation ensues. I say, listen, why don't you think about this? Why don't you go out there and just fight as hard as you can? I mean, just give it everything you got. And then they still lose. They come off the court, and I say, did you fight as hard as you can? And they say, yes, I did, coach.
That's all you get.
That's all
That's
we
all
get.
you can
That's
that's all you
all
can ask
good,
of yourself.
and there's no remorse in that thinking,
That's right.
in that
That's right,
understanding.
because it's done with choice, and it's done
Yes.
with agency, and it's done with,
Mm.
again, call it what you will, with
Hmm.
faith or whatever it might
Yeah,
be, but you've done it because you believe in it.
that's right. That's
And
right.
and if you can understand why you believe in it, then it's much more likely to
Mm.
give yourself grace later if it
Yeah.
doesn't turn out the way that you thought, to say, "Look, I did the best that I could with the information I had at the time. I stood true to what I believe. I went in open eyes about what
Hmm.
was, what happened as a result." And again, if you it that is where I'm trying, with, even if it's our own decisions or if it's about helping other people. I think that again, it's a position, it's an opportunity to be able to extend grace. And I think that that's actually really important,
I think that's very
because
important.
particularly for ourselves, and I mean, I do a lot of work with businesses and companies trying to like put their products out there. And, again, they always come in with this starry-eyed belief that they can help everybody and serve everyone. And I'm like, no, you
Mhm.
can't. And not because it's not like your thing isn't capable of helping people, but either it's because they don't want it, even when they understand it,
Yeah.
or fundamentally, like, they just don't agree with doing it that way. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I, again, I don't care what side of the aisle somebody is on.
Fair
I
enough.
really don't,
I
because
don't
it's like,
either.
I think in a lot of times we are trying to accomplish the same thing,
Hmm.
same end goal, but we really
Hmm.
sometimes don't agree on the way to do it and on the
100%.
principles that are behind it. And just what I've seen over and over again in personal life and professional life is that when you can say, you can make that claim that comes from your core, and you can make that case that comes from your core beliefs, your core
Yeah.
principles. If somebody doesn't agree with you, it is a lot easier to part with
Hmm.
respect.
Boy, gosh, that's so good. That is so
It's a
good.
lot easier to go, okay, then I guess this is just a place where we're going to have
Yeah.
to agree to disagree.
Yeah. We hug it out
And
and leave. Yeah.
but have respect, honestly, for the
Yeah.
other place. And I know some people are going to be like, I can't respect X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, again, I think sometimes we're not digging deeper under
Mm.
that. And if we do dig deeper, and it is something heinous, right? Because,
Sure.
like, think about the example you brought of the KKK. I mean,
Hmm.
that person brought it to something where actually people could understand.
That's
I
right.
don't agree with what you were doing there at all, but I can
Right.
understand the desire to be loved, even if it was misdirected.
Right.
Sometimes you're going to dig down, and there isn't love there.
That's right.
I know that. I know that. I'm not being starry-eyed about that
Right.
either. But it's like, but then again, I would rather know that up
Right.
front than
Right.
to be operating under some
Right.
misconception, mistruth about what's
Yeah.
actually going on.
Yeah. I mean, boy, that's so good. Listen, Tamsin, I mean, I've got about 1,000 more questions if you've got a few more
We
minutes.
should wrap up though. Yes, I've got
Okay,
dogs to
dokie.
walk and lunch to eat
Yeah,
and all
same
sorts of good
here.
stuff.
Yeah. No, this was really a tremendous conversation. I want to sound shocked, but I'm not. I mean, I just knew that you were coming with the goods, and boy, did you deliver.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you so very much. Would you please just share, take a moment, I mean, and don't hold back. Where can people find you? Your books. I mean, all of those things. I'll obviously put them in show notes, but I love to
Yeah,
hear
the
folks
best
talk
place to
about it.
find me is tamsenwebster.com. That's the hub of everything. I am literally
Yeah,
the only Tamsen Webster spelled that way in the universe. So, that's Tamsen with an S and an E. So yeah, so please, yeah, sign up for my newsletter. I talk about these kinds of ideas,
yeah,
every 2 weeks in that, and that's where you'll find links to my books and how I work with
yeah.
folks as well.
I would encourage folks also, if you're on LinkedIn, to follow Tamsin there
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
I'm on LinkedIn too. Yeah.
Well, because you do put out some really good
Thank
information,
you.
and even just from like a messaging standpoint, but just real quick, like in checking out your TEDx from Wilmington, I remember thinking to myself, not only picking out the questions, but I was like, my God, this was 12 minutes and she just loaded it with good information and nuggets. And so, and that's what I get about all of your messaging on LinkedIn. I'll see one little thing, I'll go, bam, I get that. And so you're behind what you suggest you are as a message designer. I mean, you really do such a great job there. Well, listen, anything else you'd like to say before we just go ahead and close this
It's
down?
just such a pleasure. So thank you
The
for having
pleasure's
me on, and
mine.
thanks for digging deep and really, going past the surface stuff and
Oh, yeah.
being curious. I love finding fellow travelers and curiosity. It's
I
always
did think that we have that in common, that we're incredibly curious. Well, listen, thank you again. God bless you, and keep
Thank you, my
moving.
friend.
I
All right,
will
thank you, my
continue to
friend.
follow you. Okay,
All right, take care. Bye
you
bye.
too.